Okay, I'm flying blind right now, guys. Sorry, we're dealing with a couple of technical things on our end. Welcome to another exciting edition of Victory Never Sleeps. Tonight, Svan and I are going to conclude our three-part series on the Völuspá. I think it's been a really good series. I've enjoyed doing it. I hope you guys have gotten a lot of value out of it as well. I am getting stuff back set up on my end. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit choppy. I'm a little thrown off, but I'm working on it. So top of the show, I wanted to say we've got, as always, we're broadcast live on Entropy, Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, and VK, BitChute, and Rumble. Appreciate that. Anybody who wants to listen to us on those platforms, feel free to ask any questions you'd like. We're monitoring those, and we'd be happy to include your questions on the program. If you would like to contribute any kind of donation or participate in the super chat to get your questions up first, or donate to us in any of the little fancy ways, the instructions on how to do that are in the instructions, are in the description of this video. So we appreciate your generosity if you guys do that. Also, if you guys like what we're doing in any and all of those platforms, make sure you like, you share, you subscribe, and we can get this out to as many people as we need to. It's exciting. We've got over 3,000 followers now on YouTube, which is really cool. Hopefully Nick will fix our video feed as soon as humanly possible.
Yes.
Yeah, we are. We're trying, guys. I appreciate it. Trying to think of what to get. Okay, and meanwhile, we're waiting on some tech fixes. Since last time we talked, okay, so we're finishing up on the Völuspá today. Next week, for the first time on the program, good friend of mine, Gothi Bodhi Mayo, is going to join me, and we'll talk next week. And the following week, Svan and I will begin what I believe we'll do a 4-part series on the Havamal. So that will.
Oh, I mean, I think it's worth noting too for people that don't know, Gothi Mayo he's lore. He is very lore heavy. So great time to ask questions, and he's a storyteller of top notch as well. He likes. So, I'm going to be on there, definitely. I'm going to be trying to plug some questions and see his takes on things.
So I think that we're going to pretend that we are just doing this in a audio format for the time being until we get our graphic situation figured out. In the meantime, yeah, I think that's all we got. Sorry, I'm a little bit disjointed this week. The tech problems always throw me off my game just a bit. But okay, another announcement I'd like to do. So I told you guys last week when we had our Odenshof website new, improved, and revamped. This week, I have to announce our Thorshof website is also up and brand new and looking dazzling, thanks to our amazing folk builder, Lydia Phelps, who's put in a lot of time and effort making that beautiful for us. So that's going to be at thorshof.com. Yes, our other websites are .org. Somebody out there owns thorshoff.org currently, but we're trying to fix it when we can. But until then, Thorshoff, THORSHOF.com. And that'll show you that new and amazing site. And again, while we wait on this tech situation, we can get right into the meat and taters of stuff. So, Svan, are you ready to start part 3 of the Völuspá?
Yes, my Ausherr Gothi, I am ready.
Proceed.
Well, okay, so we are moving into the last and final part. Let's see, okay, so just to kind of catch up a little bit, I believe we're all on stanza 51, correct? Let me just double check that again, because I think we ended on 46. Ah, dang it. I'm like 5 ahead. Okay, so now this is truly an interesting stanza because of the usage of the words, the plurals of sun. The fast move the sons of Mim and fate is heard in the note of Gjallarhorn. So the second line in that is pretty clear. We know about the referencing of the sounding of Gjallarhorn. Gjallarhorn, again, if people were to wonder, and I made mention of it before with the river Gjol, the river Gjol and the word Gjall have the same root to mean like to yelp or to cry out. In this case, Gjallr is more of the resounding horner, or the horn of great calling. And this is clear, but that first line, fast moves the sons of Mim and fate. So there's a lot of debate as to exactly who this is relating to, especially in the fact that Mimir is not mentioned as having children. Some people have thought that this might just simply mean the gods themselves. Others have correlated it to be Jotuns, that the idea that Mimir is, especially under Snorri didn't do a lot to align the gods. He didn't see the gods as, tribal alliances, or really the way we see them is in correlation to their dominion and the power that they have, and that anybody that aligns themselves with the dominion of the gods is in essence an Aus of some way, shape, or form, whether they're a beloved one or they're actually an Ausinjur or an Aus, is, that's the hierarchy. So some people have taken this to mean that the sons of Mim might have been in relation to the idea of the Jotuns. I don't have a huge take on this. I think that, and I don't say this very often, occasionally the writing of the Eddas and the poems, there's a couple of like logistical errors in which things aren't quite expounded on because there's not enough space or time. Sometimes I look at it as, does the context of the audience understand it? And maybe we don't. That could be the case with this line, but it could also be a misnomer of placement. We don't know if Snorri or even our ancestors really understood or placed a heavy emphasis on Mimir and, say, the concepts of time as more or less a part of the whole kind of painting the story with words. So, I mean, I would say most likely they're referring to the Jotnar because of everything that's happening in the poem. And we talk now about the Jotuns. We talk now about the accursed dead and the sons of Muspel. And so all of the chaotic forces are now in motion. And because of that motion, he who can see at great distance, he pulls his horn, holds it aloft, and sounds it. And this these next two parts, obviously he sounds it, but that last line, "In fear quake all who on hell's roads are." So that's an interesting one because in the Old Norse it says "Mæler Odin við Mims hoved." So there, the mention of Hell's Roads is actually kind of a I think a part on Bellows, issue is that he kind of added in there the idea of the dead looking up and kind of seeing and hearing the sound of the resounding of heaven. But in there, he holds up, or he gives out the call of his horn aloft. And I really, let me see, because I've always, when we talk about Mims Halvud and Halvud in relation to, I'm going to look into that just as we're going. But this 46, this stanza in particular, is truly an interesting one. And I think that a lot of translators have issues with it. And they try to understand or make use of it. All of the stuff about Heimdall is very clear and understood. But the sons of Mimir or Mim, and also the Old Norse version of the stanza, doesn't equate those on Hell's Road being called forth or hearing the sound. I'm really it's throwing me off, and I'm like, I want to look up something, so I want to see, because of one thing in particular. But what we're getting right now is, again, the story is starting to take its zenith point. The zenith point is really, I think, all the movement. And the Vala is talking about the unknown at this point. She's speaking to Lord Odin in a projected sense of what will come. Now, it's worth noting that I think our ancestors and by design, the gods, project an idea of hope. There's a sliver of hope in this, is that for us, the future is not projected, but is a cumulative events of will. And so that which is not is basically a projection, like someone pulling back an arrow or pulling back a bowstring with an arrow in it. You can project the idea of where it will fly based on when it is loose, but it's not fully there yet. And there's a lot of things that can happen along the way. And I think that's the key point as to why Lord Odin is doing what he's doing. And I mean that in a very real sense. I'm not speaking about that in a hypothetical. Is I think that a lot of people have a tendency to forget that Lord Odin isn't just the Faustian caveat. He isn't just the archetypal mindset that a lot of people have, is that Odin is actively doing things in order to, again, change the direction of, or at least prolong the projection of the Vala's prophecy. And this is where we start to move into that. This is the arrow in flight, if you will, but possibly changed by the wind. There's a lot going on here. So when we move to 47, it says, Yggdrasil shakes and shiver on high, the ancient limbs, and the giant is loose. Now, again, that part there is interesting because in the Norse, it says en, it's imir it altnatre and jotod losnar. It is the giant, as in like humanity, the usage of that word. I don't think it's specifically talking about a giant, unless there's something lost in there, and maybe later on in other other contexts, perhaps it is talking about Loki himself or Surtur, but it doesn't quite, focus on that. And I've always taken that to mean more of like the Jotun Losnar. The Jotun are, the giant is loose, is kind of an overall statement of the forces of chaos have now come unbound. So here we have, Yggdrasil shakes and shivers on high, the ancient limbs, and the giant is loose. To the head of Mim does Odin give heed. So here is a point that I think really emphasizes the dynamicism of Lord Odin, is that he immediately transfers through realms and enters the realm of chaos as it is now starting to boil and bubble. He goes into the depths and the secret places within the realm of chaos. And then it says here, but the kinsman of Surt shall slay him soon. And again, most people would, begin to wonder, well, okay, how is the kinsman of Surt? If Fenris is the slayer of Odin, how is Fenris a kinsman of Surt? And that makes a very interesting point. I think there is a huge amount of clerical errors in relation to connecting the dots, especially in this part. And it kind of paints the entirety of everything happening with a sense of uncertainty, even though I think it wasn't done on purpose. I think it was done accidentally. That again, this brings up a lot of I've heard a lot of discussions about how Lord Odin is perhaps slain by an unprojected, and I mean this in the sense that people haven't quite found a solid answer, but have thought of, or perhaps levied an idea that Lord Odin is slain by a Jotun or a kinsman of Surt, whereas perhaps Fenris is more a meeting of which Lord Tyr has to finish his cycle. Because again, a lot of people have keyed in on the idea that it's odd that Lord Tyr faces off with Garm and Lord Odin faces off with Fenris, and here they're mentioning the kinsman of Surt, and either this was just seen as another agent of the Jotnar or of the entirety of the chaos, and that's what binds them, is that now they're enemies of the gods, and so any enemy of the gods is a kinsman to each other. I mean, we could read it into that, and I don't exactly know how far we could stretch it. But there's, I think, a clear sense of there's framing and leaning here in order to create, I think, connective points while also maintaining poetic correction, or correct meter and correct linguistic holdings. And so these two stanzas are extremely interesting when we look at them, and there's a lot to pick apart. I'm especially like I'm looking here and I want to see, but as we're going to continue on because I just wanted to bring up points. The other thing is it's not necessarily to explain all things within the poem as it is to entice everyone listening to look at the poems, look at some of the translations, look how the translators may have turned things or shifted things in order to create their interpretations in a better light. As we go through, I'm beckoning people to look at these stanzas and try to figure them out and try to take in their own conceptualizations. I'm trying to state general arguments throughout that have been made, some that I've heard, some that I've read about, some that have been discussed, throughout the either the lore within the Gothar or the lore within, just peer studies in relation to this. And again, there's the connection between these two. The last line in Fear Quake All, who on Hell's Roads are, whereas the last line in Old Norse is Mælir Odin við míns höfuð. And that is not the the direct correlation. So these two are truly interesting. But we see now that Lord Odin moves his way towards the well of Mim, the well of memory, of all actions that have come and all things, and now is, in essence, seeing the motion of which things are going. And the Vala asks in 48, how fare the gods? The Ásum, as she, Hvað með Ásum? Hvað með álfum? How fares the gods? How fares the elves? All of Jotunheim groans, and the gods are at council. They hold Alþingi. They're holding council and trying to, again, project their next move at the well of earth in heaven. Loud roars the dwarves by the doors of stone. And again, the gates in which they're talking about is most likely the gates of Nidavellir. But, when we talk about the Dvergar, the Svartalf, we're talking about them beseeching the threshold of the material. The masters of the rocks. Would you know yet or more? So here now we're seeing linguistic and poetic placement of the gods. Lord Odin is moving. The gods are gathering to council. Again, it's been stated that the gods hold their council at the well of Erd in heaven. So we know now that if the gods are holding council, they're holding council at the well of time and its creation. So all of creation is kind of churning right now. The only one I would say that's notably lost in these stanzas is what's happening in Vanaheim, which is just an interesting point. Or perhaps the idea is, again, poetics doesn't allow it. I mean, they mention the elves, and they mention Jotunheim, and they've mentioned, Niflheim, and they mention Svartalfheim, but nothing of Vanaheim. And I think that the ultimate understanding of that is that Vanaheim is much to akin on the middle world as Yggdrasil is to the whole of creation. It is that life spark, that place of starting. And I don't think that, that place goes away. And I think that it's worth pondering and conceptualizing. We talk about Yggdrasil and its shakenness, but it does, in its own form, and heaven itself, survive. even though everything is wiped. And of the middle world, most like pointedly is that the Vanaheim survives, and that in the lower Helheim itself survives as well, almost like an encapsulation point. So each of the three levels in the Aryan mythos have like an encapsulation place, and each one of those things holds its place, its point. So this is in stanza 49. There is a mentioning that we will see again. This is a repeating, in which out cries out, Garm, the hound of the dead, the hound of hell. The hellhound is at the gates, and it is baying out because things are loosening, and the fetters will burst, and the wolf will run free. So this again, referencing clearly to Fenris, but also to all fetters. And the fetters will burst in the idea that even Garm's place of keeping and containing things is lost. So Helgard opens up. Jotunheim opens up. And even heaven is opened up. And all the fetters and all the bindings, all the gates, all the thresholds are loosened. The rivers are shaking, and the gates are thrown asunder and thrown open. And she says, much do I know, and more can I see of the fates of the gods and mighty in fight. And so she speaks here of Ragnarok, and in the Old Norse. And again, that is truly it's the regency, if you will, of the powers, of mighty powers. So it is the inevitable, it is the fate of the mighty powers as they are coming to be tied, and they're coming to be wound towards their doom. Here we have mention in stanza 50, Hrym is how it's pronounced, Hrymr. From the east comes Hrym, with shield held high. Now it's worth noting that the word Hrym means cracked with age, or to become decrepit, or to become aged. And again, you see repeatedly Jotunheim is often kind of seen as a place where time ends or time breaks apart. It's that threshold between the world of man and the underworld, and that is kind of where time dissipates. That's why Mimir's well is there. And again, I think it applies here with Hrymr and his agedness, the agedness of his cracking and coming to an older state. Again, the Jotnar are always seen as elder beings, or beings that have been around like the mountains. And that's kind of how the jump came into them being giants. But the elderness of them is oftentimes, I think, lost. And his name really holds true to it. And he comes from the east with his shield held high. This, of course, means ready to battle. He's generally seen as, the strength of the gods is rallying behind. I mean, it's the strength of the giants is rallying behind him. So his shield is held high, and he is ready. And in the strength of the gods does the serpent writhe. In the giant wrath, the word Jotun Mothi is the word that is used, and that would again correlate to the ancient strength of the Jotnar, their being. And in that strength soon comes about the twisting, or the writhing, or the curdling edges of the serpent writhe. And again, this is, speaking of Jormungandr. And it's not mentioned in the English translation, but it is in the Old Norse. So, from the east comes Hrym with shield held high. And here we have Hrymur ekkur austen, hefisk lind fyrir. And then Snisk Jormungandr I Jotunmóði. So the writhing Jormungandr is of great Jotun strength, or is of Jotun strength. So it's really interesting when we see these translations, because it doesn't make a lot of sense in English the way that it's directly written, and it has to be kind of contextualized. And then again, what does it exactly mean in Jotun strength? Or so, again, ancient and great strength. I'm getting a little echo. We're still doing that? Wait. Let's see. Okay. And we're still doing audio, correct? Okay. So, all right. Here it mentions in over the waves he twists, and the tawny eagle gnaws corpses screaming. Nail fari, or it's worth noting that the G is kind of a softer G. So instead of nagelfar, it would be pronounced nail. Nail. Like the G is kind of almost a Y sound. Nail fari. The nail farrier. Again, like a scratching hand. It is loose. And that would be, of course, because right there at the end, it's speaks of it being loosed, and it's automatically kind of understood that the audience would know exactly what we're talking about in reference, because it's not fully explained. It's explained later, but with Snorri kind of contextualizing it in the Skáldskarpus Mál, or in the Gylfaginning. But the part here that you might see is the tawny eagle. The word for eagle is Ari. It's very much like Arn in German. Arn, like Arnold, means old eagle or a great eagle. And so Ari here, en Ari hlakar. Slítur nái níðvollur. Níðvollur is like the is the bodies. And what this is most likely referring to give context, is the great Jotun known as Hreisvelk, the Jotun of the wind, or the Jotun of the stir of the wind, or at least the Jotun of wind, perhaps that is a blight wind, a vile wind. Because again, I think it's worth noting that we shouldn't contextualize the gods or the Jotuns and their powers in the middle as being one for one. It's not, Thor, god of storms. It is that their dominion and the place in which they applicate their dominion in the middle world. And so we understand that the Jotnar have this ability. And so, Hreisvelk could be contextualized as perhaps the creator of a specific type of storm, or again, baleful storms that have, kind of a destructive intent, whether that you could say perhaps, I know a lot of people have theorized the idea that tornadoes could be seen as worms or serpents, or hurricanes in a sense. These baleful winds are kind of stirred by the eagle on the edge. And in our cosmological drawing, you will see there is an eagle with like wafts of wind off of his wings, and that's who they're who we're referencing to. So the Jotunheim starts to flow towards the middle. The under is starting to rise up, and their final destination really is about transferring over and towards the land of the gods. And it's worth, again, re-emphasizing, our ancestors saw the gods as being above, but within the middle of the world. They didn't, see the gods as being on top of the tree. They don't really mention that as being the case. They see the tree as being in the center place of the world. And that place is above the clouds or above the shining place, above Lioselfheim. The mountain tops that hold the gods aloft are never fully contextualized as being a specific mountain range or anything of that nature, as more or less just that center place. And here you'd have to think of it as, again, if we're looking at the world in a flat sense under your feet, the Jotnar are coming from the east, and with it, they're stirring up the wind. So you have Hrym and all the Jotun that are, have been itching to get to the center and get to over the Midgard and up into the heavenly realm. They're crossing through into our world and bringing with them chaos and destruction. And so the eagle is flying over them, and it's stirring up the wind of great storms. Jormungandr is writhing in the water, and the Jotnar are themselves coming. And from the north, there is a cave, and out of the cave is spilling forth the accursed dead, the ones that are, were rejected by their ancestors, and their Vargar, and their, just, riding in and up on this ship. So in a way, the poetics, I think, are kind of keeping to a rule. But when you talk about it from a storytelling standpoint, it is very much an epic kind of enclosing of the middle, in which everything is kind of writhing and rolling, and wind is blowing and churning. The words here are kind of lost with the imagery that are placed inside the context. So, I like to bring that into point when we talk about it in a story form. Is like, imagine our ancestors, hearing this and seeing things in a dimensional sense that is based around under their feet. We know for a fact, and a lot of people have asked, does Asatru believe the world is flat? Does the conceptualization of that? And I don't think that's the case. I think that just as much as, say, Christianity was looking at the world in a Earth-centric view, as opposed to a solar one, our ancestors were looking at from the individual, from the folk as they stood. And so in that sense, all of the paradigms are mythically laid out, but they're also spiritually correct. The idea of the upper world is where the gods reside. In the east, where the chaos comes, that's where the Jotnar come. From the west, that's where the life and the growing and the cycles of all things. And beneath us is where the Dvergar are, and beneath that is where the souls return to Vergelmir and the roiling and rolling well. So I think it is super important to look at cosmology in two ways. Is one is as it is written, but also two, as it was conceptualized from ourselves and from our feet and from where we sit and from where we stand and from where our house is, as opposed to, seeing, it's like if I drive to the east, I'm not going to hit Jotunheim. Or if I, go eastward from my position directly, off the planet and into, the cosmos, it's again, it's about planar thresholds and what these planars, these planar thresholds mean, and what the powers and the dominions that derive from there. The gods are above, and they derive their power and dominion down into the middle world. The Jotun are in the east, and they derive their power, into us in a westward motion. The Vanir are in the west, and they derive their power easterly and into creation. And so all of these things are, I think, really important, and get lost when people try to diagram or perhaps overanalyze just strictly the poems. So,
all right, so guys, we're at a convenient stopping point here. As you guys can notice, our tech issues on this are a mess. We know the fix, it just can't be fixed while it's live. So the options are either keep carrying on like this for the next however many hours, or to get stuff back the way it is and to tape the two things together after the broadcast. So we're going to kill this right now. It'll be down for about 60 seconds or thereabouts, and we will see you guys on the other side. Again, I apologize for our tech nonsense here. Thank you very much for bearing with us.
Sorry, I was
We'll
trying
see
to
you on
keep
the other
things
side.
afloat there.
Are we back in? Okay. I was in the control room and we have no audience. Okay, I was just looking at my bottom where it talks about current views and such. All right, we got some people coming back in. Hopefully the YouTube control room gives me some real-time info on that here in a second. I appreciate you guys bearing with us. I'm trying to figure out folks on the back end so we can make sure that doesn't ever happen again. Svan, so a lot of these things aren't that we're going over in specifically these last 5 stanzas aren't really that separate. They're all imagery that explains to us that chaos has broken down the structure that orders our cosmos and our existence. And you see that, as Svan said, in different contexts, in different parts of the alignment of the worlds. You see all of these things colliding because the elements in our cosmology that cause separation, that cause order, that cause structure are broken down. And things from one begin flowing into the other in chaotic, violent ways. The order of the cosmos is broken and shaken up. And that's the most grand scale that they can portray Ragnarok on, is chaos breaking down that structure and encroaching upon the very essence of order, which is our gods. And that's where we're at starting this next section. What's that? Starting 51, I believe. So Svan,
Yeah.
So I think we had a couple of things. We do have some questions. Everybody who asked questions on the other side, we have those written down, and we'll definitely get to those. Folks that ask questions that aren't related to the text, we'll get to those when we're all done with the text. So we do remember it's they're there and we will get to them. One that does have something to do with the text, though, the Wolf Throne asks, is Mimir the Godhead? And I think that's an interesting question, and I think the concept of a Godhead in general is confusing, especially depending upon which religious tradition is using the term. In one sense, Mimir literally is memory and is the contemplative nature of that memory in a very real way. Mimir embodies the folk memory. It embodies the something that comes from that ancient time before the current order is established. Mimir's head is a font of ancient memory. It's a font of Orlog, and the idea that it springs forth, it's an embodiment or a access point to that which springs from the most ancient and from the beginning. There are elements that do coincide with an impersonal Godhead element, but our myth isn't broken down in that kind of verbiage and kind of function, so I don't think there's a clean yes or no answer. And the fact that it's a font of Orlog, if you will. One of the other elements, just kind of in the poeticness of the sons of Mimir, in a way that speaks a lot to the progression, because it talks about that in relation to fate. And, the sons of memory chronologically take us into a present, and they mention fate as into a, likely future outcome. So it gets those three separate ideas of time in that one passage in a very poetic way. And that's the thing, Chris, reading your comment over inside, depends on what you read. In Christian religious studies, Godhead means something slightly different than in Hindu religious studies than it does in Jewish religious studies. All of those things have a different degree on how much Godhead equals a personal totality of their supreme God, or how much it is the concept of Godness itself, or various things along that structure, the truth that underlies God in some of those conceptions. So again, it's not exactly clean the more you read it. But no, Mimir does not equal prime mover, impersonal, supreme God, but certainly is a font towards accessing that most ancient memory of our folk soul. Absolutely. What say you, Svan?
I think that it's worth noting that and I've mentioned this before. I think that when Christians talk about it's all part of God's plan, or it's kind of this broad head of movement or this sourcing of things. I think that if we're talking about Godhead in the way that you just contextualized it, I would say that Yggdrasil is perhaps the font, the unmoving source of all things, the first of the tripartite, in the middle, in the cosmos, in the chaos, in the great gap. And Ymir is transformed, and Avhumla is transformed, but Yggdrasil remains. But it is worth noting, where is Mimir placed? He is placed upon the root, at one of the sources. But again, as the name implies, Mimir is memory. So I think it's worth looking at, instead of perhaps the spring in which all things are flowing, is more or less the value is of where all things are flowing into, is the memory well. And that is what truly makes him powerful. So if Earth and Earthersbrunner, Earth's well in heaven, is the faunting of Yggdrasil's power into the middle world, everything's kind of descending through that wellspring or threshold of liquid into the middle world. Everything that interplays, all the weaving of Orlong, all the weaving of Weird, all the deeds that are done and the fates that are made, all plays out in the middle and then flows into memory. And then there's a root there, a corresponding root that up. So that is, I think, deeply important. But ultimately, that the idea that the wellspring above drips into the middle, the wellspring in the middle drips to the low, and the wellspring in the low drips into the proto. But each time there's a drawing up of the roots. Super important there. But if we're talking about like the Godhead or the single God, yeah, I agree with you. I don't think he correlates exactly as kind of this overarching source. I know, with Plato's referencing of things, the kind of the divine source. I would say Yggdrasil fits that far better than Mimir, but Mimir is a part of the functioning of Yggdrasil, part of that circulatory system of the worlds, of the upper, middle, and lower, and why it is so important to understand why there are roots and why there are wells and why each of them are placed within each level. I think that's a huge part of our Aryan cosmology.
So, Chris, as a follow-up, Chris, for those following along, asks, so Mimir could, as Carl Jung called it, or could be, as Carl Jung called it, our collective unconscious.
That is...
Yes, sort of. It's not so much that Mimir himself is the collective unconscious as he is a door to the collective unconscious. He is an access. His head is an access point to consult with the collective unconscious in its most primal state. The collective unconscious, the closest thing that I think we could call that is our folk soul. And that incorporates past, present, and future to a degree that's really hard to express. But Mimir is a door to that collected folk memory. Or his head, rather, is a door to that collected folk memory that the All-Father can consult. And with that, Svan, if you would like to carry on with our next stanza, please.
Yeah, I'm working currently while we're actually going forward. I'm still looking back on stanza 46, so I might be interjecting a little bit because again, the translation "in fear quake all who on hell's roads are" really bothers me because that's not what is said. What is said is that Odin measures what is happening, and Mimir shakes. So, and another thing too is he says, fast move the sons of Mim, but it's more or less contextualized that the sons of Mim are playing, or as perhaps like again the inevitable is coming true. The song of the inevitable, the doom that is coming, is playing out, and so I just that's really vexing me in a way, and I'm still poking at some of these things, and it's worth noting. Like for me, a lot of my translational stuff comes, it's like I haven't memorized the Eddas and or even the Völuspá. Like I haven't memorized it in Old Norse, so a lot of it is about kind of picking it apart, looking at it, looking at different meanings and perhaps what they could mean, whether it's modern Icelandic, whether it's old Icelandic, or whether it's Old Norse. So a lot of that is kind of that picking apart. I don't like to say certain things are what they mean unless I can kind of also get the grip of their context. Because again, sometimes, a simple name could have different context in relation to the stanza. So, I'm still picking it apart, and I'm, trying again to give the best form of, I guess, laying it out for people like a buffet for people to read into, to study, to go back and look and say, okay, well, I can kind of see it like this, or perhaps Bellows' translation is slightly different in this way than obviously like Hollander's, and so on and so forth. Because that's really what I think our place as Gothar and as the AFA have always done, is we have looked at all of the translations, laid them out, and pondered them instead of simply saying, this is the translation of this, and this is the translation of that. Because when you do that, you end up not fully contextualizing things, or, in reality, I see a lot of people just make things up or leave things gray on purpose without any, idea of it. Again, a perfect example of that is people that translate Þjóðvitnir, the people of the wolf, as to being Heimdall. That was a big one for me, where that translation was so glaringly kind of like a stubbed toe that I was like, whoa. And people they'll take that for the value that it is. They'll see it, it's written down. Oh, that makes sense to them because they don't have anything to contextualize it with. It's not laid out before them, and they accept it, they eat it down, and it's probably very wrong. So that's why, if anybody's wondering why I'm laying these out in kind of multiple angles, is because that's what I want people to understand, is that we see our gods as the gods living and working and moving as they do, and that our stories are kind of, again, seen from the angles of many different translations and our understanding of Old Norse in and of itself, which can be shaky at times. So we're in, we're in 51. So this is an interesting one too. So he says, over the sea from the east, there sails a ship. And I was looking at this translation too, the word kjol. If anybody's following along, or I don't think we mentioned that they can follow along.
We didn't this episode.
Yeah,
because we had the visual thing breaking down. Nick, if you could post the link to the version that we're reading this on, so folks can follow along if they'd like. And
yeah, that's the reason why we chose
Nick
to do that, so that people
chat.
had the ability to do it from the internet if they wanted to, or from their tablet while they're listening. Of course, people I think that are listening strictly with audio are left at a slight disadvantage. But I was looking here.
So everybody knows we are doing the Bellows translation, and you can find that independently. We just happen to have a really convenient website with the exact screen that Svan and I are looking on.
So, yeah, it's over the sea from the east there sails a ship, and the ship is just a ship. It's not a specific ship. It is, a kjol is a ship. So a ship fares from the east, and comes the sons of Muspels. Now, this is, again, another interesting thing, because I wonder, in relation to, we know that Snorri talks about the south and the coming of the sons of Muspel, and they're coming from Muspelheim. But again, they're referencing to the Jotuns as also being the sons of Muspel, or that in relation, which is why a lot of people don't know what Muspel means, but correlate it to destruction or perhaps fiery destruction or what have you. And if this is the word Muspels, then this could be seen as like from the east a ship flows, and there comes the sons of destruction. But it is worth noting that in all of these cases, we see the moving through Midgard is in the form of a ship. So again, rivers, and we talked about this before, is that rivers are always kind of liminal space between planar thresholds. And so every river that's mentioned in the stories is kind of seen as a either a threshold within the world or the plane, or between the planes. We see that with Gjöll in between the land of the living and the land of the dead. We see that again with oh crap. the name of the river eludes me, but in Harbardr's Tale, the river that he's crossing between Jotunheim and heaven. But then there is clearly, like, the river Thund in heaven is a threshold between Valhall and the other realms of Ausgard. So rivers always represent that liminal force space, and from the east a boat comes, and from the underneath a boat comes. The Muspel are faring through vessels, transferring between hard realms through a liquid. And I think that that's another reason why, when we talk about like holy spaces where people walk over bridges is a kind of re-emphasizing of this. So a ship from the east sails, with the sons, with the of Muspel. At the helm stands Loki. After the wolf do wild men follow, and with them the brother of Baelist goes. So, or Beelist. So there's a couple things there. I think ultimately, perhaps the angling of it, of the sons of Muspel and the Jotuns of the East, and all of this is kind of being laid before as, again, coalescing towards the center. But I really do like the after the wolf, all of the powers with him go. And I think that's, again, referencing to the Vargur of the underworld, of the chaotic elements of the east, or of Jotunheim, or the place of dissipation. Everything is following in after these great kind of focused points. And another thing about this is Baelist brother. Baelist is, again, an unknown factor in relation to Loki. And most, I think a lot of people that are familiar with the lore will say, oh yeah, there's Loki's father is Fárbárti, the far biter, or one that might, again, like in reference to an arrow sailing over and kind of hitting something. I've heard people speculate too that Fárbárti could be in reference to like a comet or something of that nature, but there's no like specifics that could be laid down or pointed at. And then of course Laufey, the island, the leafy, or the place that is leafy. But then there's mention of two brothers that Loki has, but there's never any real letting into it. And again, these fragments, part of the corralling of the poems, leaves us with many unanswered questions in relation to perhaps other stories. Beelist and Helblindi are two beings mentioned as being connected to, or like siblings of, Loki. And the only reason why we know this is because the reference to Loki is through this Kenning, Bailey's brother. Now, possibility of there being perhaps another reference that this, like, because they already mentioned that at the helm there is Loki, and generally translations, people believe that Bilis brother is Loki, but could they be also referring to Hellblindi? It's, again, one of those kind of, roads into the water, where we may not ever get the connection point. And that's one of the most frustrating things about the lore is like, well, who is Bilis brother? Oh, most people equate it to Loki, but they've mentioned Loki as being at the head. So, is this a reference elsewhere, or perhaps to Hellblindi? We don't know. So, even though it clearly states from the east, comes the sons of Muspel, Surt from the south fares forth, with the scourge of branches, and of course this is a kenning for fire and flame. So we have here the son of the battle gods shone from his sword. Now, this is an interesting thing. I think the translation is misplaced in the idea that they're talking about the skeins of light that shine from, or the spark of Muspel, the flames of Muspel shine forth in skeins of light from his sword or from his weapon. And they liken his sword to like a beam of the sun. And again, I think that, again, parallels to the usage of the idea that the sun is a spark of Muspel, and that the dominion over that spark is placed upon a divine power that holds that arcing order in the world, but is not the sun itself, just as much as the earth is the body of Ymir, and that the dominion over that is Yarth or Nertha, and begetting of the Vanir and Frigga. So we see here, he says the crags are sundered, the giant women sink, the dead throng hellway, and heaven is cloven. And I really love that line. It's such a powerful line in the idea of what we're talking about, is that the mountains of heaven are shaken, that the Nornir, in essence, are drawing in, the road to hell is breached, and so the below and the above are both kind of in a way met, and the clovenness of heaven is such a powerful thing. And in the translation of 52, it says in Himin Klovnar. And so again, I want to reemphasize to a lot of the folks that might not realize that heaven is a Germanic word. It is a German word. It is not in Aramaic. It is not in Hebrew. It is our word, if you will. And so a lot of people, definitely get caught up on that, like they do the word church. And even though we could clearly talk about the circle or the Greek, usage of the word, heaven is ours, and it is quite clear. So, as below is above, everything is cloven open. And so, okay, this is an interesting one here. Anybody that is familiar with the Ausinir at length of all the goddesses, and we clearly have a reference to Hlin. And it says, now comes to Hlin yet another hurt. And a lot of people have always correlated Hlin directly to Frigg. And that's where a lot of the hypostasis idea comes from, is perhaps Frigg is Hlin and Frigg is Saga and Frigg is so on and so forth. But I would say it's worth noting that what Hlin is an Ausenir directly in correlation to the protection of those that Frigg is beloved. She loves and cares for, and Hlin then is the arbiter of that protection. And so the sorrow of Hlin would be that one of the beloved of her lady Frigg is doomed now. And so I think it would be worth stating that it could simply be just as it is, and that there's no reason to try to correlate these two and get confused. It's just understanding the Ausenir. I think that the Ausenir, when we talk about the goddesses and we talk about the two major goddesses, absolutely and clearly, unshakably, are Frigga and Freya. And when we talk about the Ausenir in relation to, like, say, Sauga and Stjolven and Ljoven and Var and Vor, these Ausenir are kind of, again, correlated in as seen as kind of a court, or seen as kind of as a perhaps spokes in a wheel, where Frigga is kind of at center, because a lot of the motion that Frigga has in the world, or she's of stasis, but the motion around her is through the Ausenir. And so again, now comes to Hlin yet another hurt. When Odin fares to fight with the wolf, and Belli's fair slayer, this of course is referencing to Lord Frey, as he has been referred to as the slayer of Belli, seeks out Surt. And so these two are kind of, again, correlating the end dooming and connection points. And so Odin fares forth to fight the wolf, and Frey fares forth to fight Surt. And if you take things quite literally, you would be like, well, why are those two mentioned as being the hurt of Hlin? And I think it's just simply noting that the protection and the charge of the beloved of Frigg is about to meet the doom, and that is yet another hurt. And I think that when we're talking about yet another, we're talking about Balder. Balder is, of course, Hlin is, in charge of, in the protection of him as beloved of Frigga, and now to another hurt is to come. And then, again, the addition of Lord Frey fighting Surt is, again, doesn't quite correlate, but there must fall the joy of Frigg, which is, of course, Lord Odin is the joy of Frigg. So 53 is, I think a lot of people read into it too much, but it's an understanding of poetics, and the addition of "and Belli's fair slayer seeks out Surt" is again an addition that throws a lot of people off. If you look at line 1, line 2, and line 4 in stanza 53, they're all in correlation to Odin. And I've often wondered, was this an interjection? Was this something that during the compiling of the poem, it was added in order to create the correct, meter? Because it just kind of sticks out. But that's, again, perhaps that was just something that at the time, and understanding with Snorri's translations and with the compiling of all of the Eddas at that time, we're talking about 150 years after Iceland is converted. So there is a lot that can happen in those translations, and it's just worth considering. So in stanza 54, then comes Sigfather's mighty son, Vidar, to fight with the foaming wolf. In the giant's son does he thrust his sword, full to the heart his father avenged. So the usage of the sword, the usage of again, the avengement of, and in the giant son, the understanding of who that exactly is the Jotnar, or the Jotun-born Loki, who is the son of his father, Faurbauti. So this is Fenris, or this is the Chaos Wolf that is being avenged by Vidar, who has come to finally commit to his correct action and bringing that. So, we talk about the meetings of these one for ones in the Völuspá, and there are of course gleanings in other poetics, but here it's pretty much just straightforward. In 55, the translation here is truly, again, kind of interesting. In the Old Norse, this is "Thou kemur in mikli móir Sigfader, Vidar, veia at Valdiri." And it says, "Hither comes the son of Hlothin," which is an interesting use of the translation. I mean, I don't understand why it simply couldn't be Sigfather, Victory Father. The bright snake gapes to heaven above. Against the serpent goes Odin's son. And this one is again still draws a great amount of question as far as where we go. And a lot of people reference the Hauksbok, and which this stanza doesn't even exist. It's not placed within there. Hlothin, of course, too, is another word for Jorth. So again, I think the reference there is that Bellows is trying to say this is Thor coming forth, but he doesn't say like the son of the Sigfather. He says the son of the earth. And again, we talk about that quite often with Lord Thor, as he is the primogen of natural order natural law and cosmic order. He is the exact birthing point of those two powers. That makes him different than, say, perhaps any of the other children beget from the earth, is that he is of the earth and the sky specifically. And that's why at the mural at Thorshof, he is wearing red and gold in his chest with a blue cape. Again, fire and light and the air. And then his leggings and his wraps are brown and green, and blue, representing the earth and the water. And so he is the coalescence of the two. So Thor now steps forth to meet his doom against the serpent. And it's also worth noting, too, in 54, that he doesn't talk about the referencing of bringing up that Garmr cries out again at Nipa's cave, or Nipaheller. Some people say just Nipa's cave or Nipa's chasm or Nipa's gate. But it's the underworld, and that part is repeated. So if you're looking at 54 and it says, Ger nu Garmr mjok fir Nipahelli, it's that repeated stanza, and he doesn't include it in the English translation, but cries out Garm from Nipa's cave. So I don't know if you want to take questions there. We we keep.
So we don't really have any questions that have come about so far from the text. I think that, maybe some of the poetic expressions of these things are unfamiliar or confusing, but I think most people understand what's going on here. Most people understand and are of our audience are familiar, at least in broad terms, with the events of Ragnarok. And I think that's, I don't know. I think folks are listening and taking in the beauty of the poetry and the different nuances that you're, linking them into. One thing I think is worth noting is the interchangeability of Jotnar, of the forces from Muspel and the forces from Jotunheim. Earlier in this series, when we talked about how there is a variety of giants that are talked about in our lore, there's also a variety of, in our lore, there are a lot of terms that get broadly applied based on a thing's allegiances. We see that the Aesir originally referred to a tribe of gods, a particular kind of gods. But after the first War of the Gods, two groups of gods all come under that heading of Aesir from there on out. They're all aligned. They're in a place of alignment. When there's big, grand Jotuns that are primordial forces of like big cosmic things, those often are wise and, some are even beneficial to the gods to interact with here and there or to mate with here and there. And if and when they do, they then go into that Aesir category as well. But the others that don't, and the ones with ill intention, form this bigger group of Jotnar, which kind of encompasses all of the bad guys, if you will. You see at various times Jormungandr or Fenrir referred to as giants or as the kin of giants or with this Jotun attachment to them. You see that used a lot. You also see that with the idea of a troll later. A troll can mean lots of different kinds of bad stuff we don't like that's on the bad guys team. Those words kind of all have those things. And you see it in a more positive way on the term elf or alf. It can mean a variety of different types of beings that are in an elevated state closer to our gods, some of which are male ancestors, some of which occupy the natural world and are land spirits. Some of them, are conceived of as like the Yule elf that delivers presents and stuff. A lot of those good beneficial spirits are Alvar, just like any of the bad enemies of order, enemies of the gods, forces of chaos get the term Jotnar applied to them in a way. And it's just something to kind of track in your head as we go through the information.
Yeah, and it's, if you're able to read along on this, the 54 and 55, especially in relation to like Hauksbach and how the standing, evidence of the verses are kind of in bad shape. But there's it's also, worth noting that Bellows kind of shifts things around because in 55, he says, then comes in great strength, Sigfather. And I got that mixed up. The Old Norse, he has, it's 55, but he says it in 54. then comes Sigfather's mighty son. And I realizing that Bellows' translations kind of, again, chop things up and then rearrange them on his end kind of throws me off as I'm reading the Old Norse side. And it's like, some are correct in their placement, and other times he shifts things over in the English version.
And keep in mind here, you're trying to get the bigger points that are laid out, and you're trying to get an understanding of a better way of relating to our gods through our lore. The lore as it's come to us is not perfect. You can see in the text that we have where Bellows makes a mistake in translation from the, original source material, which is, again, many generations after the first telling of this in that language, which in and of itself is eons after the origin of these events, as our, the spark occurs divinely in our folk to manifest into our lore and our Eddic stories. So the exact specifics of all these things are fun exercises to try to hunt down. And as you can tell by Svan's enthusiasm on these things, it's cool and it's fun and it's worthwhile to do, and you learn a lot through the etymology. But the point of all of this is to better understand and build relationship with our gods and to align ourselves with them. And I suppose that's another thing that's worth mentioning going forward. And again, we're going to do this from time to time, is take little detours off the lore to talk about some of these points as they're relevant to Asatru. So just as different beings are known in our lore by their points of allegiance. We saw it with Brandy when we were talking about different groups of people in Beowulf. We've seen it throughout this when we talk about the forces aligned with order versus the forces aligned with chaos. The defining characteristic of these people is the team that they are loyal to. Choosing a side matters. There's not celebration of any of the figures that sit by and aren't on either team. People pick a side. People pick a side and put on the jersey, and that's really important to define who someone is. Something essential to an Asatru mind frame is defining you by who your friends are, who your family are. What team you have aligned yourself with tells us who you are. If you don't stand with any team, that's terrible. That was the worst thing to our ancestors, was the concept of being an outsider, being a loner. You wanted to be part of a community, part of a tribe, part of a family, part of a house. And so it's really important in Asatru that you take those sides. The word Asatru means loyal to the Aesir. It's not just we believe in the gods or we ascribe to this generic, or we generically associate ourselves with this corpus of lore as the backdrop for our existence. It's much more than that. It's this being our corpus of understanding of our cosmology, and then us taking the extra step to be loyal and to affirm our loyalty and our standing with the Aesir. And those are two really important, separate things. There's been a movement. I say movement. There's a current in heathenry, as the unaffiliated people would kind of call themselves in modern times, to accept the mythos, accept the cosmology, but not define their stance in it or their loyalties to it. And that's firmly not what we do in the Asatru Folk Assembly, and not what being Asatru means. A similar thing is in Christianity, for example. You have Christians that define themselves by their loyalty to Christ, and you have Satanists that most of them don't even really believe or really worship the Christian devil as much as they stand in opposition to Christian normalcy. But the point of commonality is they all accept the Judeo-Christian mythos as their canvas that their life is painted upon. They accept that as the reality they're within. For a time, that was the only commonality in modern Asatru, was this idea of, loosely believing that this myth cycle is our myth cycle. And you had, misguided people trying to be Rokatru or Vanatru or all these different little things to make themselves a special snowflake. No, we first accept this as our reality, and then from that place of understanding, we choose to stand loyally with the Aesir. And that is a fundamental to our practice.
You mentioning that, and just again, the rampantness versus the tangibility of ideals, the rampantness of people to like edge lord, the edge lording of edge lords. Like they were seeking these kind of like finite and brittle crusts in order to establish themselves as being some pioneers of ideals. And I really think that was ultimately, you could see, especially when in relation to people claiming that they were loyal to the Jotun or the Jotnar or Rokatru or whatever the hell they want to call themselves, is that, in reality, they're applying this concept that I started to see in the early like 2000s, 2006, 2007, is the idea of like the Germanic ideals of heroism, the Aryan ideals of divine heroism and nobility were being rejected, and that it was the Jotnar who were actually the kind of misunderstood, and that the gods were just Chad jerks, like, bullying or being or what have you. That was a clear thing. That was something that absolutely, even though it wasn't said outright, was clearly being leveled. These people are basically saying that their worldview is that the gods of order, which they don't really truly see them as or believe in them, are the bullies of the thing and the misunderstood. And so you clearly see they're really just painting a kind of worldview or a philosophy that they have upon the gods, and that is impious in its highest form of just, I can't even like conceptualize around it. Again, I have seen worse in illustration, but that's pretty bad just in, I guess, living your convictions out loud. These people are basically stating that. And what hubris to be able to live in a world where, if the sky was to quake above them, it would clearly shake them to their core. But when they're at home and they're in their armchairs, they can, state like, oh, well, the gods are really like the bullies of the whole thing, and the Jotnar are misunderstood. And, it's like that. It's kind of the obliviousness of being so disconnected from natural law and cosmic order at the height. And I think that the Jotnar revel in that ignorance. They revel in that, their inability to kind of ground themselves in the divine measurement in which the gods have stated and placed before us. And again, if you are a supporter of that disillusion, if you're a supporter of that cosmic kind of chaos, you are not Asatru, and you are in essence kind of feeding into the overall And I think that also came about with a lot of the blanket caveat was that according to the lore, Snorri was just Christianizing things. And again, I spoke about that in the last episode, is that is not, I think, a correct path for any of us to follow, is understanding that our ancestors did see, a darkness and a light. There was a gold and an evil. There was good and evil. There was, him and ya and hell. And it was just that, yes, perhaps there is Christianization in context, but it's not being made up as in like there's an absence of it. It's just that he's changing the context. We still have those points and references. So these people are just basically creating, caveat arguments in order to get out and do what they wanted to do. I'm sorry, I'm reading some of the comments. Corroborated by Tumblr. What a terrible place. Yes, that was what I was speaking of in relation to the blasphemy of, and I'll use that word because I just, not because it's ours, but because it's worth it. It's the terrible pictures of the Asa being like utilized for political jargons. Sif wearing a hijab was probably the most just enraging to see, as if that was in some case, because her hair was cut off in the story by Loki, that now she's, down for wearing Muslim garb. Or, that Lord Tyr and the fact that the hand is missing, that he's somehow, what is it there that are able, or I guess pro handicapness or whatever. Tumblr and basically impious people, they abound, and they have a new medium in which they can spread a lot of these ideals. And yes, it's terrible, but there's a lot of people that are kind of working against it. And I think too, another thing that's worth noting is a lot of these people either fall away and don't continue on with their faith towards the gods. They're just using the gods to prop up their political ideology. Yeah, sorry, Adam. Yes, it's wearing a hijab. That was brutal. They're utilizing the gods to kind of push their agendas, and that is the greatest way of understanding that they don't believe in the gods as powers. They don't believe that the gods have dominion in their life. They don't believe that, and that could ultimately extend to the Jotnar as well. This is just a game for them. This is just something that they're doing on the weekends. This is just a lexicon of words that they utilize to, I guess, apply their shitty ideology. And it's infuriating. Absolutely. Handy capable. Oh, terrible. So let's moving on from that. How's here go? These I'm ranting, if you will.
No, you're fine. It's absurd, and we don't. By rejecting the foreign faith of Christianity and rejecting its mythos, that's one step. But if we're just transferring the same rebellious edgelord stuff, but putting a Norse coat of paint on it, it's not fixing the problem. I think a lot of our people talk about shifting our worldview, and some of that has to do with shifting our points of reference from a Judaic system of points of reference to a Aryan system of points of reference. But it's much more than that. That's a step to get us into a different way of seeing the world. But what takes you from something else to being Asatru isn't that. It's that and then aligning yourself with the forces of nobility and order. Without that other step, you're just a different flavor of degenerate edgelord with different symbols.
Well, again, a lot of the beauty of the poetics are here in Bellows' translations, but there's like some key points too that again kind of show up in relation to perhaps the way he translates things. So, he says, in anger smites the warder of the earth. Forth from their homes must all men flee. 9 paces fares the son of Fjorgyn, we'll get into that, and slain by the serpent fearless he sinks. So, in 56 in the Old Norse, Thou kemur in meiri móir hljóði Injar. It now comes in might the son of the earth. So the earth's son of the earth and of Odin, he comes forth to meet the mighty Midgard serpent. And in Midgard's, the usage of the word Veyr is really one that I like to key in on there. Is the from the might of Midgard's holiness, the Veyr, the strength of. So now we're talking about the might of Thor against Jormungandr, and in this, I like to conceptualize some of the things as we're talking about perhaps greater cosmic ideals instead of just nitpicking on poetics. Is that I kind of feel when we're talking about the son of the earth and of the sky, if we're talking about Lord Thor as his point of the between natural law and cosmic order, between the sky and the earth, between all of these things, I find it oftentimes worth considering the might of his being in relation to the earth as like the magnetic. Sometimes, and as we know in this understanding, and I've spoken about that before, is our understanding of science kind of also helps perhaps look at myth or mythos in an interesting way. Is this moment of understanding of like perhaps the magnetic pull or the currents of the waters in relation to each other and how these kind of come about, and with our understanding of perhaps the flows underneath the earth and the flows above the earth, we're starting to see that again, the great shifting. And I've often wondered about the 9 paces. There's a lot of theories on it, or conceptualizations, I should say, not theories. Conceptualizations as to the 9 paces. The 9 paces could be simply a poetic reestablishing of the holy number 9. It could again also be seen as perhaps phases in which the turning of the earth and the currents are, composed of as they move and change, as this fight between Lord Thor and Jormungandr commit. Oh, I also wanted to mention that Jormungandr means the gigantic wand. Again, and this is a poetic reference to a snake not having legs. A snake not having legs, in essence, is a Gondr, but it's a turning, coiling, gigantic wand is a poetic usage of the name of the great serpent. So if we were to say the world serpent or the mighty serpent that looses its tail, it's in equivalency with English that we could say that without, saying the direct translation, or because that would lose its poetic meaning. But Jormungandr is oftentimes just viewed as, it's I've heard people say like Jormungandr or Jormungandr as just a name without, contextualizing its poetic meaning. But, I wonder often if the skalds that speak of the stories of the gods, if the name of, like, to conceptualize the idea that what if Jormungandr is a name that is utilized for poetic meaning in the Old Norse, but was not spoken of in direct, like, referencing before. The understanding of the serpent is as old as our people, and the idea of then this coalescence of the warrior fighting the serpent, the striker fighting the great worm. It's all there, but it's, I think it's important for us to understand that Jormungandr is the Old Norse referencing to this force, this being, this serpent, the that are undoubtedly our ancestors knew of, spoke of, and we can clearly see it through all Aryan mythos as not being called Jormungandr. Is that it's like the force is older than the name, but the name is also important because it's one of the last and most beautifully poetically, levied names towards this creature. So when people, speak, I think, like, when they're coming into Asatru and they're speaking about the stories, and they that's the serpent is Jormungandr, and Jormungandr is the fights with Thor, and instead they should also kind of open up to understanding that Thor, Thunor, Thonaraz, Donner, he has many names or variants of names in our languages, but he is that mighty god who is fighting against that mighty force. And it goes past the Viking age. And I say that with air quotes. And it's worth, noting that. And again, it places itself when people try to overly translate and stick strictly to Old Norse without conceptualizing origin of story and where stories come from and why they were spoken. They were not spoken always in poetics. They were spoken as tales. And then those tales, can be formalized into meter. And it's beautiful. And even to the point where, again, it's almost semi scripture-esque in the idea of how beautiful it's sounded. But I don't think we should overly focus to the point where we lose origin and core and understanding. Again, that applies here with the son of Fjorgen. So Fjorgen is like the word Yarth. It is in relation to, and Snorri calls her a Jotun. We know that the goddess of the earth, as according to Tacitus spoke of, he calls her Nerthus. And so a lot of times this correlation is, seen as more of a linguistic and not a hypostasis thing, is that the Old Norse simply just called Nerthus Yarth because it means the same thing. It's the earth. It's where we get the word earth from. It's where we get the word hearth. And in the same sense, when we talk about Frigga being born of the earth, so Fjorgener can represent, and it throws people off because it's mentioned clearly of Fjorgen as she is the goddess of the earth or the dominion of the earth, and she bears forth Frigga. And a lot of people try to, again, hypostasis her and Frigga as being simply the same, or they need to make, again, Odin is singular sky daddy and Frigga now is singular earth mommy. And all of those iterations and the plurality of polytheism kind of starts to get washed away, even by people who claim that they're polytheists. The idea of the usage of the word Fjorgener clearly states that he is the son of the earth, and that the earth is, again, Yarth, or the birthing of the solid to the sky, the above. And in that case, Odin is the sky father. That's what he is, the father, and he is of the sky. And he comes and he, melds with Fjorgener, or with Fjorgen, or with the earth in the beginning. when the battle is ensuing. So, a lot of people try to conceptualize, well, no, he couldn't be with Yarth. He would have to be with Frigga, but they're trying to create marriage lines or different things, and they lose context of what's going on here. As Lord Odin is dynamic and he is threefold, one of his fold comes down and impregnates the earth, and the earth then gives forth the great being of fury that is Lord Thor. So I just wanted to contextualize that. They're talking about him as the son of the earth, but that kind of levies itself to be, again, the son of Yarth, the son of the earth as a goddess and as a being that is the dominion of the body of Ymir. And that puts a lot of people in a tizzy. I don't know why, but it's like, again, I think that when it comes to tangible bodies, whether we're talking about the earth or the moon or the sun, it's very clear for us to say, or even just, let's just say people that we know, like, oh, that's Mother Nature. Don't mess with Mother Nature. But the manifestation of the elements or the earth, our ancestors saw as much like an inhabited thing, like a house, or the dominion of the earth is being formulated by Yarth. And so therefore he is of the earth through her and of the ground itself, kind of both the spiritual and the tangible, if you will. So in stanza 57, the sun turns black, the earth sinks in the sea. The hot stars down from heaven are whirled. Fierce grows the steam and the life-feeding flame, till fire leaps high about heaven itself. Even the sky is on fire. The one thing here I wanted to see is in relation to a specific word, but we're talking about now that the heavens are engulfed in flames as well, in lieu of the earth. Because remember, when we're talking about the heavenly world, it's the center and the above. And so if the earth and the world is on fire, now the flames are reaching the place of the aloftness. Even the tree is being singed by the flames now. And that's a huge, huge point, as we're seeing movement again in reference to flames. Let me see here. I was wondering too if you wanted to take a couple of questions. Yes. The turning black. So instead, the kind of dimming to turn into darkness. The sun turns into the darkness, and the great power of the earth sinks into the waves. And heaven is stirred. Great torrents flow. And old flames are, lick the edges of heaven as it is set ablaze. 58 then does commit, and he adds this, he correlates it, even though he didn't before. Garm cries out again from Nipahel. The fetters will burst, the wolf will run free. Much do I know, and more I can see of the fate of the gods and the mighty in fight. So this, again, is one of those repetition lines that re-emphasizes and recontextualizes who's speaking. The Vala is speaking. A lot is going on here. So there's so much being kind of projected forth that the poet utilizes this as like an anchor point. So as the poet could read through the stanzas from memory in his head, he would then come back to this point. And then, like, okay, after this verse, there is this stuff that I need to finish on. And perhaps this verse is kind of like a hearkening of the finish. It is the final gate in which we move through in order to kind of close out the poem. And this is, again, it becomes very, very quick. Now I do see the earth anew rise all green from the waves again. He writes, the cataracts fall and the eagle flies. I think this is, again, the overhead, all that which is blocking light and blocking the wind is kind of falls. And he uses the cataracts, which I thought was truly interesting. And fish he catches beneath the cliffs. Sá á fjalli fiskur veiðir. The eagle catches the fish. So everything comes back into order. The natural kind of inclination. So she really jumps into kind of the destruction of all things to the immediacy of it being kind of reordered again. And that things are kind of brought. I've always kind of taken this as perhaps after the great turning of this sundering, this breaking apart, that the order of the eagle catching the fish is again the telling of a great amount of time in which things have to work themselves back to the semblance of what we could understand as being normal. The gods in Iðavel, the gods in Iðavel meet together. Again, Iðavel is the plane of work. It's the place in which Ásgard is built. Iðavel is seen as kind of like the great expanse. It's a valley, if you will. And so, again, referencing to the gods being in a valley in heaven, Iðavel is that place of potential where Ásgard was built.
Love you. See you morning.
And they meet together, and they speak of the Moldvinir, the holder of the soil, the holder of the earth, or mold is dirt, soil, earth, or ground. And so here they speak again of Jormungandr and the age before when things were settled, and the mighty past they call to mind, and the ancient runes, and the ancient runes of the ruler of the gods. Of course, this Fimbultyr they're referring to Lord Odin and his attainment of the runes. So in stanza 60, the gods in Iðavel meet back together. And again, it's not referencing to the sons of the gods, but I think it's understood that there are some who survive and those who do not, and that they are anew in a different way. And now the new hierarchy is attained. Generally we speak of the rise of Baldur, unified again, whole, with Nana, and that if you will, it's like Baldur and Hod become one as the true form of Baldur. And, he takes his stead along with all of the other gods, again, multiplicity. And they speak of Lord Odin and the one who knew the way of the runes, who attained them through sacrifice. Finn ask æsir á Iðaveli, og mold þínir mátkan dæma. That part right there about the gathering of the gods in Iðavel. And I think it's also worth referencing that perhaps they're calling to mind Iðavel because it's the place in which Ásgard stood, and that they're talking about the new potential being built up again. in verse 61, we move into the Vala again describing the return. This is the kind of the new dawn, if you will, of the gods as the cycle realigns itself again. The holy land of the gods has been sundered. Heaven was, given asunder. And now things are turning, and that new dawn is to arise again. In wondrous beauty, once again, shall the golden table stand mid the grass, which the gods had owned in days of old. So the remnants of the heavenly order, the remnants of all that which they built, the organization of the world, lays in ruin, and they are being picked up by the new descendants of the gods. Then fields unsowed bear ripened fruit, all ills grow better, and Balder returned. Balder comes back. There Balder and Hoth dwell in Hropt's battle hall, in their father's hall they stand. And the mighty gods, all of them, would you know more? Would you know yet more? Here is an interesting part too. I think that one of the points that I bring up about Lord Odin as being the three, if you will. The three is one and the one is three is in here in reference to Honor and his taking of the prophetic wand. Is the idea that Lord Odin is three but one, and if one is taken down, he is not let go. He is not destroyed in whole. And so again, Honor or Vili, if you will, takes up the prophetic wands, the understanding of the runes, if you will, the tines. And the sons of the brothers of Tveki abide in Vindheim now. Would you yet know more, or how? So this is truly, I believe, like this is a really, really interesting translation. When we talk about Tvigi, I think they're referencing to Odin, and I've brought this up numerous times about him being the trifold, but if he is slain in Ragnarok as one, there are two that still remain in the idea, but it's not two separate. It is still Odin. Odin still remains, but now is two. So he's the twined one, the twisting one, the one that is, bound together in twos. So I've always kind of taken these translations as why I, at Odin's Hof, when I spoke, I said Odin is three but one and one but three, is again kind of in correlation to these stanzas. And the idea that the dynamicism of Lord Odin is that he is a tripartite. And that tripartite is stilled after Ragnarok because one of the three is kind of destroyed. But he is still here. He is still, takes place within Vili and as Ve, or in this, Tveki, the twice bound now instead of the tri-bound. Then more fair than the sun, a hall I see roofed in gold. It is Gimli. And a lot of people have always, I don't know where this came about, the idea of Gimli. It stands, there shall the righteous rulers dwell, and happiness ever there shall they have. And somewhere along the way, someone was trying to say, like, Gimli is the heaven of the gods. If they were, it's like the place above Asgard, or they try to create like another level. I don't think that's the case. I think they're speaking of now the golden hall, the joyous hall of Gimli is the new hall in which the gods commit their enacting of order again. And there comes up high all power to hold a mighty lord, and all lands he rules. And so this is an interesting one too, because this might very well be, again, perhaps an interpolation, but it says, thou kemer in Riki, that then comes in the kingdom at Reyendomi, the regent domini, or again, it's these words exist and united through Aryan languages, is that this is the, in the kingdom, this mighty world leader is to rule over. And you could take this in a lot of different ways. Some people have said, this is the Christianization part. Snorty's talking about, Jesus, and he has mentioned in other poetic forms a kind of correlation that were far more clear. But he might not. He could also be speaking of perhaps a worldly leader or an avatar of the gods that takes over the dominion of the earth, or takes a dominion of the folk, or takes a dominion of the lands. This could also have a historical reference in the idea that perhaps it was placed out that, like, the king of Norway, or it was that Harold the Fairhair kind of took over the dominion of Norway. And so the idea of this trope of a uniting king is still there, even outside of a Christian context. So it doesn't always have to be that he's just throwing in this. He's referring to Jesus. He's Christianizing it, because, again, I think that facilitates that excuse elsewhere. I think what it's more important to say is that the idea of a unifying leader comes forth, and this could be the leader of the gods, or it could be the leader of the folk. It's kind of left, open. And it says, from below the dragon dark comes forth. Nidhogg still exists. Nidhogg, the soul of Ymir, still writhes, because, again, he is not mentioned as being slain in all of Ragnarok. And from below, he comes forth, flying from Nidafjord, from the underworld, or from the land and the shadow beneath. The bodies of men upon his, or the corpses he bears upon his wings, the serpent bright, but now must sink. So, again, I think this is another iteration, and another reason why I often refer to Nidhogg as the soul of Ymir is that he rises in the as his soul was released in the beginning, then too he rises up during the upsurgence and must sink down again, as he is part of that gravitas. The soul of Ymir and Nidhogg is as correspondent in polarity to the brightness and the soul power of Yggdrasil and of Bor and Bestla and their creation of heaven. These polarics have to exist. It's continuously in our mythos cycle, and so they have to state it in a way to kind of, again, bring it. And I think that's very Aryan. So that's why the stanza 65, I don't always kind of correlate strictly to Snorty trying to Christianize anything, as it is more or less a reaffirming of the unifier leadership, the unifier. It could mean even just, like, again, the rule of faith over the folk, and that the folk now come to understanding the gods and living their life in unification under the rulership and the regent of faith itself towards the gods, and are no longer sundered or broken.
I think it's far too easy for us to take anything that's confusing in the lore and immediately, Snorri's trying to Christianize it. I think that's an easy answer for anything that we don't understand. And I think that's intellectually lazy, and I don't think it's doing our job to try to understand our lore, understand our faith, and build a better a better understanding of our God and what they want for us and the wisdom of our ancestors. There's nothing in there that talks about Jesus. And as Svan said, I don't think we have perfect clues on exactly what that reference at the very end is. But the idea of unifying our just constantly bickering people that have such hard times getting along with each other, unifying them under a mighty Lord that controls things and that's in charge of stuff is a really nice idea. It can mean a lot of different things. And to struggle to come to a more perfect understanding of what that might be, I think is interesting and inspirational and shouldn't just be oh, that's just Jesus stuff. Like a quick go-to, and I think that's lazy and unfair. I think one of the things that I've always been very inspired by is some of this imagery in the Völuspá, how it how the cycle of our divinity starts and ends in this tale with the bookends of structuring order and restructuring order. The bookends of, in wondrous beauty, once again, shall the golden table stand mid the grass with which the gods had owned in the days of old. This reestablishment of the natural order of our gods and divinity within the cosmos after that wolf age and that time of destruction. It's been very inspirational in the fact that we are reforging the faith of our ancestors, that we went through a period of 1,000 years or more, depending on the place, of our gods being submerged in the murk and the deep of Christianity, and our reclaiming the things of our ancestors, resetting things up, rewriting the tables, reoccupying the halls, honoring the gods once again. That imagery is very inspirational to Asatru as we have it today, and the things that we're doing, the things that we're doing together, and the goals that we're trying to achieve. I think that imagery is a powerful thing to guide us through that process. So I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. I've enjoyed having this time to go through the Völuspá with you, and I've really enjoyed listening to Witan Svan share his deep insights on this with us and go through this with us. So thank you very much for that, Svan.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. It's good. I'm reading these comments. I'm reading a lot of these great points. I think one thing that was brought up is, the idea is you'll hear a lot of the word interpolation in relation to like when they're looking at Hauksbok and the Regius, the Codex Regius, and is there an interpolation or was it dropped out? Was it forced in? There's a lot of that. But if we read the entirety of it as the stories themselves, I think it's clear that they have like a great correlation. When people correlate the Futhark with the Völuspá greatly.
Here's the other thing.
In relation.
If this is the only Etic poem that you ever read or have ever read, then there's all kind of references to things you may not be familiar with. There's things that may not make as much sense. One of the things with our lore is there's not a clear stopping and starting point because it's gathered from far and wide. Once you become more familiar with all of the different stories that we have access to, each of them shed light on the others, and you gain a more complete understanding and a more complete picture of the story as told. And it gives insight to these little tidbits that may seem odd or may not be readily accessible to you. So that's a really cool thing. Also, I want to thank Dale and Hope of Illinois. They made a $20 donation. We appreciate that. They said, we appreciate all you guys do each week and those working behind the scenes. Well, thank you, Dale and Hope. We appreciate you, and thank you for your donation. We do have a few questions here that have stacked up. The first one is from the very beginning of our broadcast this evening. All right, so this one is for Robert E. Boy Lee. Anyways, for Svan, what is your favorite Sam Hyde bit? Yes, this is relevant because Svan mentioned Sam on the show before.
I'll just say that the TED Talk is probably my favorite because of how almost prophetic to a degree that was. So if nobody knows what we're talking about, perhaps this is just between me and E-Boy Lee, but yes, the TED Talk, the Roman armor, and again, he called it. These people, they want you dead, they want your kids brainwashed, and they think it's funny. So, pretty interesting.
All right, so
I don't know how it's gonna.
No, you're good. Real quick, I want to go to our next question and leave you with that here for just a second. From the Wolf Throne, Matt and Svan, do you try to give worship to some of the lesser popular Aesir, such as Vauli, Uller, Bragi, and Forsetti? I feel like these gods don't get as much attention, probably because they don't have as much lore as Odin or Thor. Also, I feel like Frigg and Freya are the only Asatru talked about. Do you ever try to reach out to Saga, Gefjon, Sjofn, Air, or other Asatru, even if we know little about them? So, answer is yes, spoiler alert, but I think Svan and I both have kind of different stuff to add on that. So, Svan, if you'd like to go ahead with your part of that.
Yeah, 100%. I've been a big proponent at the Hoff and in certain times when I, just to kind of emphasize, remind ourselves a lot with new people coming into the faith. We'll have a bloat to Lord Frey, and they will still hail Odin because of a couple of reasons. One, they might be nervous to step outside of their comfort zone. The other is that they're still kind of coming from a singular, non-polytheistic view. Perhaps it's a safety net. There's a lot of that, but you'll hear a lot where it's like we're honoring, Lord Uller and Sif during the turning of the year and the time of winter finding and the broaching of the wild hunt, and all of this stuff is going on. And there's one person who says, like, and I don't think that's wrong at all, but it's like it makes me want to again get out more about the gods as being multiplicity. And I think that so when you're talking to me about personal stuff, I can speak pretty freely because I try to keep it open and broad when we talk about the application of theological points towards our folk as a church. But when we're talking about personal stuff, absolutely. I have a strict hierarchy of the gods. I believe in the tripartite. I have the remaining gods underneath to equate to the 12. I have Lady Frigga and Freya, and then the Ausenir and the Austvanir and the Heavenly Wardens, all within their structuring for me. And I find that when we talk about the Ausenir let's back it up. So first you were speaking of like Ullr and Forseti. I do believe that they have absolute prominence and worth to give honor and praise just as much as Thor and Odin. It's just that a lot of times we see the way they apply their dominion differently. The dominions of the tripartite is much bigger, or at least more broad sweeping, whereas perhaps the dominion of Forseti is very focused. And so I find myself kind of like, as I move through my life, I see the gods and their dominion enacting in the world, and that's what propagates my prayer to them or my thanks to them. I don't, I will speak to the gods as a broad quite often, but when it comes to like really the minute individual gods, it's kind of as I see them. If a friend of mine is committing himself to a time in which he has to face perhaps litigation, I think, I pray, I praise Forseti, because suddenly that part of my life is like shined on. If it comes about storytelling, a little while back, I did a couple of stories at Sigerheim, and later on I gave thanks and praise to Lord Bragi, because I feel that storytelling and music and things and the arts of passing those on is his dominion, his power. And so a lot of that, the way that I personally interact with the gods is about the way I encounter their dominion. And I'm trying to be aware of their dominion in my life. And so I would beckon anyone to do that as well. And it's easy to see how the tripartite's powers are kind of always in our lives. But when we talk about the Ausenir too, I view the way, again, this is my personal structuring of the hierarchy of seeing Frigga and Freya, and then when I pray to say air or to var, or I just recently presided over a wedding, and I clearly invoked the power of Vaur as the emissary of the ladies or the maidens, the goddesses of Fensaler. And so what I kind of do is, when it comes to the goddesses, I view Frigga and Freya as high kind of concentrated points of worship, with almost like a I don't want to say like saintly worship of the other Ausenir, but I see their dominion as being very I can individually pull it out, or I can see it as the kind of the woven things of society, of our folk nation, and of our interactions together. Everything from Lady Snotra and her what I call her governance over mores, our cultural interactions with each other, and the way that we should act correctly, nobly, if you will. And but it's what makes us, noble. Or I light a candle to the Ausenja scene at the Hof. We light a candle at the threshold. So there's little things, and they're always there. But the idea is, it's harder for people to wrap their heads around the individual gods or goddesses, when really they know Lord Odin, they know Lord Thor, they know Lord Tyr, they know Lord Heimdall, and that's about it. But also too, it's like, again, how much does the dominion of that Aus preside in your life? The turning of winter, the hunting season, Ullr clearly holds. So yeah, I definitely am a big believer in it. I speak of it often amongst the Gothars. Like, I view in my hierarchy that we have 42 gods, and I am clear and concise about where they are. And then outside of that is what I would call perhaps the elevated, like Wayland or Volander, or Skirner in relation to Lord Frey. but I see that hierarchy, and it's very important for me. I don't think it's so much a necessity for others as it is to understand the multiplicity of the gods and their powers and dominions are working together. And so, like giving praise unto a kingdom, you don't have to honor each individual thread or piece. You can give honor to the kingdom and hold true to the rulers of the kingdom. But I like to do that because I try to structure those things clearly. I've done that my whole life, but it really came into focus once I joined the AFA, and I understood the words of hierarchy and of order and of that understanding, and immediately my mind started to kind of place things. So like I even have, drawn diagrammic sense, not like a lot of times you see diagrams of the gods as like son of and in relation to. No, I the hierarchies of heaven, as I call it, with the tripartite at the top and the Aesir gods, all to make 12, and then the Ausinir, and then the Austvanir, who are also there. I think more or less I don't honor the Austvanir very often. That would be an honest statement. Like when I honor Lord Frey, I do hail Gerther, but I don't pray to her often. I don't pray to Skavi often. I don't pray to Sif often, or Idun often. And that's just being honest. I kind of group the Austvanir as the beloved ones as a whole. So if anything, I can admit that, because I see their dominion as being very nuanced. And I kind of praise them in with every god and goddess.
So a couple of things. When approaching our faith with devotion and piety, things become very important, and one wants to do things right. One of the difficulties is that if our attempt is to honor each and every god and demigod that was revered by our ancestors, we are never going to have a completely perfect answer to all of those. So a lot of people languish trying to thresh out minutia to get everything perfect, instead of making their best attempt with what they know and altering it down the road when they know more. I've said this a lot on the program, and I'll continue to. Don't allow perfect to be the enemy of good. If the only time to honor the gods is, well, once you know all of the gods you're supposed to honor, then you'll spend a lifetime honoring none of them. So there's been a certain fetishism, not just in Asatru, but in spiritual circles for a very long time, to waller in ignorance and claim a false piety because you know so little. Like, well, all I know is that I don't know enough. And, this perpetual searching and never finding thing has become very popular. It's a popular refrain in any kind of pop spirituality, to not have any answers to questions, just to have limitless questions. And I think that's showing off for your friends. I think it's lazy, and in a way, I think it's masturbatory. One of the key components of our faith is will and determination, and well, who's to decide? Well, in many ways, each of us is to decide because we have a certain amount of sovereignty over our own souls and what we're going to do. In a larger sense, well, who's to say? Well, for one, we have an established priest class of Gothar who have devoted their lives to this and studied it. So, who's to say? They're to say. Ultimately, when I became Gothi of the Asatru Folk Assembly, well, I don't know. Who's to say? I guess we'll never know. No, I owe you better than that. I owe our gods better than that. Who's to say? In the AFA, I'm to say. And that's a really important responsibility. It's not because any of the people that I've mentioned are perfect or infallible on it, but myself and the Gothar have spent our life devoted to this and devoted to our gods in a perpetual quest to be our best selves and to draw closer and closer to a perfect understanding of them. And to share that we learn with our folk and with our church so that we can all benefit from the lessons that are learned by our Gothar, by our ancestors, by those who've come before us and laid the foundations for Asatru and what we practice. So that's a long way to say this. Well, which God should we worship? There's, and you can make extensive lists and we could all come up with different ones. So, boom, we decided, all right, the Gylfaginning lists them. It lists them in a way that they're specifically referred to as which gods are, good for men to worship. These ones are, go. And that's what we decided is our point of starting. Are there more that you can also include in your practice? Certainly. It's very clear on the gods that are mentioned in that list. And in that list, there's numerated at 12. There's a following list about the Ausignur that is, I believe it's 14 strong in that following list. Now, 12 of those are what we would call, are commonly called, Frigg's handmaidens. There are hierarchy amongst people. I believe there's a hierarchy amongst the gods too. And I certainly don't want to get that wrong. And I apologize if I diminish the respect that any of our goddesses are deserving. But the way it's laid out appears very much that many of those that you mention are loyal servants of Frigg and messengers of her, goddesses, perhaps demigoddesses, if you will, that she can send out as her representative in different ways that have authority over a variety of things. Now, to the original question, certainly you can try to build a relationship with any of those, with any of the Ausignur, with any of the Aesir. And we're actively, so many of us already do that in our own personal lives in many different ways. I've seen things on the side. Growing up in Alaska, we would always honor Uller during hunting season. We carry over that practice in the AFA by honoring him at winter finding. We seek to do that. I know a lot of people, especially ladies, have different relationships they build with the different handmaidens of Lady Frigg for a variety of reasons. There's a lot of worship that goes on around Air because she is known as the greatest of healers. And we have a lot of people that go through illness, either themselves or in their family, that have devoted a lot to worshiping her and to interacting and building a relationship and building goodwill with her. One of the big steps that we seek to do about this is with our Hofs, specifically with the Aesir. All 12 of those gods listed will have their own Hof. And we're committed to making that happen as we build a temple for each of these gods. We very much look forward to building a closer and better relationship with them, and winning good favor from them, and learning more about them, so that by our children's time and our grandchildren's time, they will have a much better relationship and better knowledge of these gods of our folk. And I think it's a grand gesture that approaches, a worthy gift to these gods, to establish a temple for them. Perhaps the first temple they've had ever. Certainly the first temple to many of them that we've ever known of. I, specifically look forward to a Völuspá and a Vidarshof to celebrate these mighty gods that have a very brief remembrance in our lore, but a very important one. So we look forward to doing that. And as you mentioned earlier, there's already quite a bit of a cult for Bragi, for Forseti, for Uller, for a number of our gods that, again, aren't the big, super well-known ones. So we're working on that. But yes, to answer your question, we absolutely do. Our priests do. Our AFA family does, and has been for quite a while. And we seek to do that better in the future. Next up is a question from Nick, and it looks like it's directed at you, Svan. I've always known Nerthus as Yord, as you said, Svan, but ancient Teutonic priesthood seems to be relating Nerthus, that Nerthus is Njordr. And he quotes, "Again, the cult has features in common with that of Nerthus, attributed by Tacitus in Germania 40 to certain tribes of the southwest shore of the Baltic. The word Nerthus is identical with Njordr, the name of Fro's father, while FRL itself seems to be an abbreviation for Yngvi Freyr or Ingunar Freyr," from page 297. So this has come up a lot, the linguistic confusion due to the similarities of Nerthus and Njordr's name. What do you have to add on that, Svan?
One, there's the linguistic separation and understanding that if there's a Nerthus, and they talk about perhaps a conceptualize of a gender switch, but that Nerthus somehow gender switched to Njordr, and I think that they're correlating language to divinity, and I don't think that that's necessarily correct, because what we see on the other end of that is that it's stated that Lord Njordr is has a bride, and it is mentioned again as being like his sister bride, and this again I think correlates to the Vanic concept of divine twins, and not necessarily being literal in like a sense of that, though it is kind of poised against them in Lokasana, but I think that's an interesting poem in and of itself, or the story that spurned that poem. But to speak of that, we know that it's mentioned that her name is Narun in the Old Norse, and that's the only time it's ever mentioned that his bride. And so what we don't have on the front end of that is Tacitus talking about perhaps a male conjugate to it, kind of correlative parallel. He does talk about Nerthus, but that's missing if there is a male kind of counterplay. But we do see it on the other end in relation to the Old Norse, and their version is that there is Njordr, but the name is lost on his sharing of the other side, whether it's Njarun, which again, I don't know if that was placed in because of linguistics and the ability to kind of make the tempo and meter work. Was it another name? But when we talk about the linguistics of Nerthus to Njordur, they both have the same correlations about being that which is underneath. And that doesn't necessarily dictate a point A to point B. Nerthus becomes Njordur. And I think that's what the mistake is he's correlating the linguistics to mimic the divine. And I think that when we look at other things, we see there's clearly a twin culture of the Vanic practices, the idea of a masculine and feminine part that were one and then divided or separated or work in congruence with each other. And this seems to, I think it's within fair faith to apply that in relation to Njord and Nerthus. The linguistic connections of their names are quite, poignant. And we don't cram, and I certainly don't believe in the whole gender swapping thing. I think that might be an attempt, again, to play a narrative. I find it really interesting because one thing that a lot of people don't consider when they talk about Danube and Danu, they often talk about the river being feminine, but they don't often talk about like the Gothic people having their Donwas or Donvos is the masculine side. So what if it was an understanding that perhaps we don't see very much of, is that there was a corresponding masculine to the feminine, that Danu and Donvos or Donwas were seen as those correlative, and that Nerthus had a correlative of the linguistic of the time, but was never mentioned. And then by the time of the Old Norse, Njordur is focused on, but the naming, or at least the placement of Nerthus, is lost because of Norrun as its usage in the poem, and Jorth, the earth. Again, that linguistic of Njordur and Jordur, that which is beneath the earth and that which is the earth. So those correlations of language, at a certain point, you can either say, I don't know, or I see this as the clearest path. And that choice you have to make. And again, we've emphasized it enough too, is like, we're not going to honor Njordur and say, oh, that was Nerthus in the past. Because, linguistics or however it might be stated. Instead, we will honor Njordur and we will honor Nerthus. But the question is Nerthus linguistically connected to Yarth, the earth? I believe so. So we're not hypostasising Yarth to Nerthus. Tacitus clearly mentions that Nerthus is goddess of the earth. And Yarth in relation to Snorri calls Yarth a Jotun. I think that's the biggest point of perhaps debate, is how Snorri kind of organized things, or really didn't organize. He just kind of, he set some of the things hard, which we utilize very much so. But when it comes to like Jotuns or people that align not people, in the stories, the beings that align themselves with the gods.
As we've mentioned those several times, there's the confusion between types of Jotnar. In the Eddas, there's, ancient beings of primal wisdom that go back into the mists of pre-creation history. And then you have the forces that stand in opposition to the gods and folk. And so there is some of this overlap and some of these, benevolent forces that start outside the realm or outside the identification with the Aesir that come under that through marriage. And so we do see that interweaving of primordial power with cosmic order. And we see it a lot very specifically in the relationship between Nerthus's children, or between Jord's son. You see the earth and sky meeting to create Thor. So very, and I mean, it's always been poignant imagery to me that lightning is literally that. It's the connection of energy from the sky and the earth. And the point where they meet is the clap of thunder and the bolt of lightning. So when going through, one of the other problems is that Tacitus was a pagan. I don't know how pagan he was. He was a polytheist in an Aryan tradition. But at the time, the two groups of people seemed worlds apart. And he didn't, a lot of what he wrote on was very cursory understanding of what these strange tribesmen north of his frontiers, of the strange faith they practiced in the dark forests outside of stuff he knew about. But Chadwick in 1900, writing the ancient Teutonic priesthood, he wasn't writing as a man trying to reestablish the ancient Teutonic priesthood or as an Asatru. He was writing as a scholar about what these ancient barbarians used to do. So his stuff is all about linguistics and, you know, matching points of archaeology, as opposed to trying to apply divine wisdom to things and trying to understand the relationship of a people with their gods. It's a very different kind of study. And again, as I mentioned before, it comes at religion from two very different angles. The linguistic arguments are really interesting. And again, it's one of the reasons I have Svan on here as often as I do. One of his big things that he focuses on is etymology and linguistics and words and what they add to things, because they do, but it's what they add to the faith or what they add to the understanding. They're not the source of the faith and the source of the understanding. They're a way to better understand it and better clarify it and create a picture of it to us. It's clearly understood that Njordr has a counterpart. Yes, the connection between Frey worship and Nerthus worship are very similar in the sense of wagon processions. There's clear elements there that are carried through. And we know that Nerthus had a partner that he begat these children with. It makes much more sense in the corpus of our Lord and our understanding that this is Nerthus. When we look at Njordr in a later Norse context, he's very obviously masculine. There's not confusion, there's not ambiguity. He is clearly a he. When we look at Nerthus, there's not ambiguity. She is clearly a she. Because linguistics at that point don't make that distinction clear in the word itself, doesn't mean that the story surrounding the word doesn't make it blatantly obvious. And our gods don't do this tranny, like, let's transition thing. These are the same deities under that understanding. If you're trying to assume these are two of the exact same deity and one is male and one is female, something is very wrong there. They're not separated by a long period of, by a, in an archaeological sense, a very long period of time. And because our gods are real, they're based on, the current understanding is based on previous understandings all the way back to the beginning of our folk, because again, our gods are real and our gods are eternal. So a fair moving of that, and again, if we are going to celebrate linguistics so much, it stands to reason very much that Yord and Nerthus are one and the same. That fits the stories and the lore and the understanding of our folk. And it's also something that over time, through building relationships with our gods, that we have come to have certainty in and to feel very certain about, just like we've come to have a very clear certainty that there's a distinction between Nerthus and Yorther, and that one is very clearly a masculine deity and one is very clearly a feminine power. All of those things we can rest very solid in the knowledge of, because the last 30 years of practice have shown those things to be true. And it's hard to express that in a way that makes the clearest sense to people that may be casually tuning into the broadcast. But we have had people making offerings and engaging in the gift cycle with Nerthus since the dawn of modern Asatru, or very close thereabout. We've had folks making offerings and engaging in the gift cycle with Lord Njorther since the very dawn of modern Asatru as well. Those relationships have proven beneficial and well received, and those who've engaged in them have been blessed by that relationship over this time. And that's given us the understanding of where we're at. Chadwick didn't seek to have relationships with our gods or to engage in the gift cycle to further his understanding. His whole argument is pinned solely upon the word choices of a very admittedly imperfectly understood linguistic pattern of one ancient Germanic people as is translated into Latin. So I don't think that's a lot to go on. Even in the text, he didn't put a lot of insistence upon it. It was just a scholastic theory of the year 1900, removed from an active worship of our gods. And our different take on that comes from decades of engaging in worship of these gods. So I think it adds a really important credence to that. And that's another point I wanted to make on some things that I've noticed is a common misunderstanding amongst the outside world when they look in at the Asatru Folk Assembly. One thing that we've been accused of by the naysayers for forever is that the AFA is not a real religion. It's not a real church. We're just, insert whatever negative word you want to use about white people who happen to be proud of themselves. We're just a white nationalist organization that hides behind a religious designation or whatever. And most of these people say that without actually knowing anything about us or interacting with us. But one of the things is, when the enemy repeats a falsehood enough times with enough consistency, it weasels and worms its way into people's heads. It's worth always restating, especially for people who are not currently members of the AFA. That's not what it's about. That is a point of commonality amongst our membership. being white is certainly a prerequisite to participating in our ethnic faith, which Asatru is. But no, we're a church about the Aesir and about a real relationship with real gods that we believe wholeheartedly in and define ourselves by our loyalty to. From there, we build a pro-white, pro-traditional community based on those values. But our community and what we're building and doing is based on our faith and our ethnic relationship with our gods. That is the core that we're built around. And we very much are a practicing faith and a practicing church. And it defines all we do. It's very different than the assumption that our foe makes that, well, we need a religion, so let's make one up that sounds coolest, that matches our whatever political ideology. No, that's not what we're doing. Political ideology ought to flow from your core values that flow from your relationship with your gods and your intrinsic understanding of right and wrong given to you by our gods. And it's really important to reinforce that and go back to that many times. I've seen those conversations on Twitter. I'll do a search where you just search for, Asatru Folk Assembly and see what comes up. And a lot of the chatter by people who aren't members of the AFA is this common wish list of them creating a religion like it was some kind of video game, and they're picking and choosing things that they want to add to their made up religion thing. And I think that's because we come from a generation where atheism is so very prominent, and to where the generation is defined by a sarcasm and a cynicism. That needs to be left at the door when you're trying to understand the Asatru Folk Assembly and who we are and what we believe, because that whole thing is completely contrary to our core values. We approach it with openness and with genuine piety, and we let that guide our understanding of our faith and its structure. And all right, so I appreciate you guys being with us tonight. I appreciate all your questions. We do have another question that's come through. Vrilmage asked, anyone hear about Alphany? She was in German, England, and Hungary, very popular, but lost in the sources. No, I'm not familiar. Are you, Swan?
Yes, in a way. This is from when I was even mentioning that during the last Gothar call with about Nehelania as well. I did a class a couple of back at Winter Nights when we were at Ohio. I did a Deeser class and I brought her up. Along with Nehelania and, of course, Deeser worship or the Matrone worship. Okay. And she seems to be, there's two theories, is that one, she is a localized goddess of, Central Europe, that she is somehow connected to the Matrone cult, or like Nehelania, Nehelania, she's seen as a local goddess. Someone also tried to correlate her to there is a Greek equivalent by name, and that they were trying to say that Alphany is a Germano-Celtic variant of the I think she's a muse. I'm not 100% sure on that one in the Greek, and I think her name is it's either Veronius or Uranius. And kind of like in reference to Uranus, but as in a feminine form. And I'm not super familiar with her on that but that they were saying that linguistically that might be, and that she somehow may have influenced Germano-Celtic people through the matrone worship. And I brought that up. I think I'm not 100% sure if she is, again, a localized goddess. I think her veneration is widespread enough that she could be very easily considered that, like Nehelenia. And we see the motif of the matroni, of the three, and the Disir. And we know that the matroni worship is very kind of similar to the Germanic Edis's worship. So is she an Edisis? Is she a goddess? That would be the best question to ask. And my answer to that would be, I don't know. I would consider it to be she would be an elevated goddess, especially of a local power. And then that to me would be in my hierarchy, outside of the Austvanir, but elevated, much like, again, Volander or Wayland, Skirner, Hermod. I believe Hermod, of course, is an elevated descendant of Lord Odin that is now living amongst the gods. And that's how I kind of view that hierarchy, is what we see from the front end as we observe, not on the back end, like through etymology, saying like Njord is Nerthus, or I look at it as like, if we talk about the gods, I see the tripartite and the other 9 gods. I see Frigga and Freya, and I see then the other 11 Ausenir, and then I see the 10 Austvanir. Again, and Snorri doesn't always give us clean explanation. Where is the origin of Lady Idun? Where is the origin of Lady Sif? But we do have the origin of Skadi, and we know that, again, the ideas that I call them the beloved ones because of their alignment to the gods. A lot of people don't even recognize or remember or think about the violent and kind of correlation between the motherhood of, say, like Rinder, or as the mother of Vauli. I would consider them to be Austvanir. And so in the correlation of them, the 10 Austvanir, I also include Yarth, as she is not quite stated in the Gylfaginning, and she's actually referred to as a Jotun, but is clearly the mother of Thor, so therefore she aligns herself with the gods and with the side of order, so I consider her a beloved one. But again, that's just me classifying and hierarchy, a clean way of understanding the gods and their relations with each other.
All right. And as has become kind of a frequently occurring lately question, we have one about does he phrase it here? Before it's time to go, what is our vision of an exorcism? I only know how it's done in Christianity. We talked about this, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, but there's not a clear-cut example of that in our faith. Now, one of the things that I was talking to one of our Gothar about the other day was this sort of a concept. There are malevolent entities in the world that exist. Those aren't just there are certain things in this world that we all interact with as shared humanity, as shared earth fauna. Like, there may be a spiritual significance to a certain range of mountains that might be relevant to each kind of people on each different side of the mountain, that could be completely separate and have their own gods and their own cultures, but the mountains still exist. There's certain things that just are, that we come in contact with, and we have a different frame of reference depending on our faith, but there's malevolent entities in the world that seek to perpetuate chaos and thrive on negativity, on fear, and on bad things. They're conceived of in a very specific way in Christianity, where they're, forces of the devil trying to pull a soul from their God, and there's this tug of war going on with them that they're part of, and there's this whole narrative that they fit into. We don't have that so much. We encounter negative spirits, and I think some of this is the heroic nature of our faith. We are not pawns in some kind of game between the gods and Surt and Loki or something. We individually have Hemenia and magical might within ourselves, and we are allied with and on the team of the Aesir. But I don't think that we're waiting vessels in the same way that other faiths conceive of their practitioners as. So we encounter those kind of malevolent things at a distance, and not so much internally as if they take possession of us. But some of the things that are more similar to a state of possession are things like nightmares, or things like literal night hags and witches at night that, oppress and control a person for a time in that liminal space between wake and sleep. We have times where, we just read, the prophecy of the seeress. There's very few people, but if you are trying to practice an oracular form of divination where you are opening yourself and serving as a conduit or as a medium for spiritual forces to work through, then you also provide a medium that negative forces could work through as well. And so I think that some things open a door to that. I think that leaving your body vacant in the act of projecting yourself in a meditative state or other things perhaps puts you in that kind of a position as well, to a degree. But these are really specialized things that come into play with people who are dabbling in a high level of magical practice. For the average person, I don't think that occurs in our faith. It's just kind of not a thing. One thing that's a commonality across the board seems to be that negative forces respond to actively resisting them. They seem to respond to doing things and ritual intended to cleanse and to make the very conscious, willful expulsion of them. And they respond to the invocation of deities and things that are more powerful than them on a spiritual plane. I think that were there to be something similar, and I think we do some of this, I'm not aware of anyone who has performed any kind of Asatru exorcism. I am aware of people that have been asked of Gothar that have been asked to clear a home or a space of bad spirits and bad energy. And I think it's similar in that regard. I think a very common thing is invoking Lord Thor to protect things. The Gothar have always, since ancient times, used Thor's hammer as a talisman of protection and of hallowing, of driving away evil spirits, and of welcoming and empowering something with holiness and with, appropriate divinity. I think that's a thing. So depending on the situation, there's ways of doing that. But that's the closest thing I can really conceive of in that context. Do you have any wisdom on what an Asatru exorcism would look like?
Yes, and I was looking at that while you were speaking, and I see this is coming from Zamo, and I wanted to bring up one point and it kind of correlates to the question, but roundabout. First and foremost, I saw the one you said, your mother always says, I believe in false idols and Christian mumbo jumbo. It's very frustrating. I know that frustration, but I would give you this bit of wisdom. You could always simply state that you are not an Israelite and you are not adhering to the covenant of the God of the Israelites, and the first covenant commandment first commandment to maintain that covenant is that you put no other gods before the God of the Israelites. And you could simply state, I am putting the gods of my people before the God of the Israelites. That's a great bit to put that down there, is that you're not worshiping false idols. That's such a dump stat thing that they do, when in reality you can simply bring up the first commandment and say, I put the gods of my people before the God of the Israelites, and keep it as clear as that. But to go on with that, since Zamo, you are the one that brought up the interesting question about exorcism, is, again, when we talk about Christianity, one of the big caveats is, even though there's a lot of like bridge building, they build these bridges halfway. It's kind of like, in a lot of ways, it's like some political groups too. They don't think of the full thought arch. It's like nobody should have guns, but all police are racist. It's like, and only the police should have guns. It's like they don't think these arches all the way through. And one of them is like, your soul is infallible. It's eternal. It's given to you by Yahweh or however they view it. But yet it can be taken over by a malevolent shadim, is really what it comes to. And what this is reenacting. They're reenacting some key points, and you'll see it a lot amongst Christians, because a lot of these Christians that claim to be able to exercise, especially in the Protestant field first. In the Protestant field, you'll see these Christians, saying, oh, I exercise demons with the power of Christ and the Bible and my faith out of these people. Again, this goes against the idea of the infallibility of the soul. And I think it's a tool utilized by Protestants in order to kind of puff themselves up in a way. But when you look at it, is the infallible soul able to be taken over by a being? And where do we see this? We see it in the Bible. We see it in when a Sarmatian woman says to the rabbi Yeshua that there is a shadim in my daughter. Can you exorcise it out? Can you, or not the word exercise is of course Latin, but can you expel this shadim from my daughter? And that's because the Sarmatians were also Semites. So the word shadim would have made sense just as equally to the rabbi. And he says to her, no, I won't. I'm here to concern myself with the children of the of Yahweh and the Israelites. And then she begs and she pleads. And then he says, okay, well, masters do throw scraps to dogs, so I'll do it. And a lot of people don't like to talk about this part of the Bible, but it's a reenactment of that. And that the idea of demonic possession, which again, the word demon comes from Greek. So let's say shadim or djinn possession is heavily a Semitic part of their mythos. The Arabs have it too, in which the shadim can inhabit a place or inhabit a person or inhabit an object. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of the cursed Judaic boxes called I'm at a loss, but it's there's a demon inside a box. They have this deep connection in their mythos to these malevolent shadim or djinn being able to inhabit people, places, and things. We don't necessarily have that. It's not a huge caveat in our thing. We do believe in malevolent spirits. We do believe that malevolent spirits do attempt to perhaps control you. Again, Alzhirigo, they brought up the Nachtmara, or the nightmare, or the hag, or the sleep paralysis demons, if you will. We believe in these entities, but they can't simply just take over the body. We don't see them as being able to interject themselves as a 10th element of the soul.
This gets into kind of it's awkward to talk about because I don't think words adequately convey some of the points. When we get further afield on some of these things, it becomes strange. But magical efficacy, spiritual might is very much tied with intent and with the ability to focus will. The rules that spiritual entities such as this play by are often the rules and the paradigms that we set up. If a big part of your faith structure, which is your internal soul environment that you have built magically for yourself, is built upon a helplessness and a weakness in the face of spiritual beings and a built-in fear of them, then they start out with a much greater ability to control you and manipulate you because you've built that very hospitable environment for it. If you're looking, if you are a thief and you are looking to steal stuff, your first choice is going to be the people with open doors that are inviting you in to take their stuff. You're not going to try to assail the fortress. You're going to go to the easy mark to get your stuff. If you build for yourself a spiritual fortress with faith in your gods and your ancestors to help you, and also with a dignity and a might within yourself to be able to stand proof against bad spirits, there's a much greater challenge for them to overcome to seek to manipulate you or to do whatever bad stuff they want to do to you. So you're creating the internal environment of the victim is seductive to those forces. You're creating the internal environment of the champion is not something they want to pit their will against yours in. If that makes sense. And I know that's out there for some folks, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. And I think that probably holds true across the board and not just in an Asatru context. Zamo, you have a question over on the side kind of about, is this something that you can do on your own? Do you need somebody with greater spiritual authority to do these things? If you on the side will reach out to Nick or myself or Svan, we'd be happy to get you in touch with a Gothi that's maybe close to you that could help you with this. I don't think it's a prerequisite. I think you could do a lot of it yourself, and I encourage you to try that. But if that isn't working for you and you'd like the help of a Gothi or a Githio, we'd like to help you get in touch with one that can maybe help you in your particular circumstance. So please do that. And Svan, you had a thought. I just wanted to make sure I put that out there beforehand.
Yeah, everything you're really leaning in on is so important because it is the difference between our faith and their faith, the ground in which you make fertile versus the attainment of your fortress as a your body as a whole cannot be just kind of usurped upon, and that is huge because you're clearly showing the shining examples of the differences between. I didn't also mention that I think on the Catholic side of that whole story is that it's very much a tool in order to propagate the power of their church. Again, I talked about the Warrens and their usage of demonology, or I guess Shadimism, in order to kind of propagate the church and their priesthood. It would be very akin to us, like saying, we're going to tell you this scary story about one of our members of our church in Asatru having an act with a Nachtmara, and then one of the Gothar came in and like took care of it, and we're like highly publicizing that. It starts to create yeah, it creates that paradigm. It creates that usage. I would say too that I saw Zamo your said about the shadow. The word shadow is an Anglo-Saxon word. So there is no like linguistic connection between shadva or shadve or shadway and Anglo-Saxon to shadim. It's just that those words didn't translate well. So when the Israelites or the Jews that were coming over into Greece had problems like correlating certain things, like for instance, they used the word Christos instead of Messiah. They used Angelos instead of Malach. They used Shadim instead of or they used demon instead of Shadim, and so on and so forth. But just wanted to bring that up. And I see Viril Rage answered my question. Yeah, the old Dybbuk boxes that were going around on YouTube as these, interesting little bits of like Judaic like mythos going out on YouTube. And of course they bring a rabbi in and he explains everything, and it's wild. But truly an interesting question though.
That sounds exciting. All right. So again, thank you guys all so much. Thank you for bearing with our technical difficulties we had early on in the show. We appreciate our producer, Nick, and all the effort that he puts into making this function. We are very lucky to have Nick, because all the different back end stuff is not something I can do by myself, certainly. And we appreciate all the work you're putting in. Sometimes it's thankless, and I want us to take the time to thank you, Nick, for the effort you're putting in. Svan, thank you for coming on, sharing your wisdom with us, and we will see you again 2 weeks from today as we begin our study of the sayings of the High One. Next week, please join me. We're going to have Gothi Bodhi Mayo on to talk to you and introduce himself and talk about Bodhi stuff. He brings a lot to the table. He's been practicing Asatru longer than myself, and I think about as long as you, Svan. I'm not sure which you or he who started first, but their Asatru practice goes well back into the 90s.
Yeah.
So it'll be exciting to have him on. Here we go. All right. Well, we'll talk to you guys then. Until then, hail the gods, hail the folk, hail the AFA, and remember that victory never sleeps.